Okay friends, happy Wednesday. We are in our day 13 of our 1 Corinthians Bible reading plan, and honestly at chapter 11 there are so many things that we could talk about, but I want to highlight one thing in particular, and then for everything else I would say go read the email. One thing that I think we often get wrong about Paul that I want to just talk a little bit about is this idea of head coverings. What is Paul trying to do when he says that head coverings are required for women in worship? We don't do that now. So we import our ideas of head coverings being oppressive to women into the text when we read it. And so we thus equate Paul with being misogynistic. And look, before we go there, we have to take a step back and we have to understand what Paul was doing in the ancient context, because veils in the ancient world had a much different symbolism. They represented something different. And I think what Paul is actually doing is something really significant that we can learn from too. So again, Paul says basically that any woman who doesn't cover her head dishonors her head. So he mandates head coverings for the worship environment. We're in the middle of this section of 1 Corinthians where Paul is talking about all the different ways we should approach the worship environment. So everything he's talking about with head coverings is within that. How should we approach worship? So here's the deal. We know Corinth was known for being a place of sexual immorality. It was a haven for prostitution, and it's within this context that we have to understand what veils meant. Veils became, in the ancient world, to be known as a symbol of modesty because prostitutes, slaves, unmarried women were not allowed to wear veils. It was required by law that you be unveiled. Why? Because they wanted to be able to see who was sexually available, okay? So you import that into the worship environment, and two things have happened. One, when you have women their heads are covered and uncovered, you are turning the worship environment into this place where men are seeing who's sexually available and who's not. Is that the right attitude for worship? No, I don't think so. That's not what should be on your mind when you go to worship. But here's the other thing. Because it was slaves and prostitutes primarily who were required by law not to wear veils, when they came into the worship venue uncovered, what does that signify? It became a class system. The veils were a symbol of the upper class women, the more respectable and honorable women, right, in their view. And then there were slaves and prostitutes who were uncovered. And what Paul does is he mandates across the board that women ought to have their heads covered. And it's not because he wants to oppress them. It's actually because he wants to level the playing field. He wants to take these women who are required by law outside to not be covered, who were seen as not honorable or not respectful or just sexually available. They were like boiled down to just that part of their selves, and he levels the playing field. In the worship environment, it's like Paul is saying, we are all one. We are all equal. We are all worthy of respect and honor and dignity. And this is God's house. It is no place to deal with who is sexually available or not. That is not the purpose of worship. It's a pretty different picture than what we think of with veils, right? Remember, here's the other thing too. We think of worship because primarily the worship environments that we're in are these big venues with hundreds of people, auditoriums. It's not really an intimate affair in most cases. But in Paul's day, worship environments more often than not looked like small gatherings at different homes. And so you're not talking about a big environment where there'd be hundreds of women uncovered. You're talking about one or two or three in these house churches, right? It's a much more intimate environment. And so again, in these intimate environments, Paul is leveling the playing field. He's getting rid of the class system that existed. And he is saying all women are worthy of respect and honor. Veils were a symbol of modesty, not oppression. So I think this is pretty powerful. Paul is going to make the same argument about leveling the playing field, getting rid of class systems when he talks about the Lord's Supper. So it's not just with head coverings. He's dealing with this across the board. He is setting up worship as an environment where everybody, no matter what your background, no matter where you came from, no matter who you are, no matter what your present circumstances are, when you come into God's house, when you come into a place of worship, we're equal. We're one family. I don't know about you, but that message today is extremely powerful. Who are the people when you look around yourself in worship that we tend to like kind of put ourselves on a pedestal? Paul would say absolutely not. Absolutely not. Now, veils for us, we don't have to wear them, right? We don't live in a culture where we're required by law to cover our heads or not cover our heads. That's not our reality. But if you think about it, I bet you can think of other ways that we do this. What are the ways that we subtly put ourselves in different classes or look down on people for different things? I think this is a message for us today. When we come into God's house, we're all equal. And so we ought to treat each other as such too. I hope this helps. Again, there's so much more we could talk about with authority and the wife or the husband being the head of her what. Go read the email. I talk about all of that. I hope you have a wonderful day and we'll see you back here again tomorrow.